Hello everyone and welcome to the Grim Tutors, your one-stop shop for all things Magic the Gathering. I am Colton, also known as Pez.
And I'm Oblivion. So, what are we talking about today?
Today we are talking about slang, street words.
For all the Magic the Gathering gangsters?
Yeah, for all those mother of goons.
I feel like we've said a lot of words. Like, we've said so many things, and come up with a lot of vocabulary, so how on earth could there possibly still be more?
We haven't went over the slang terminology that you might hear at your local game store while playing a game of Magic the Gathering. So these things will help you hopefully not get confused.
They're not printed anywhere. They're just shit people say.
Just words.
Made it all up.
Let's jump into it.
Starting off, we have answer. It's usually like trying to find
an answer.
Yeah, an answer. You are either trying to stop an opponent from winning, you're trying to remove whatever the problem is, whatever is determined as the situation that needs to be stopped, changed, altered, whatever. An answer, you're either like looking for an answer, trying to find
You're trying to find the answer to the problem, which is why it is called an answer. Like you're trying to find a counter spell for your opponent's win con. You're trying to find a removal spell for your opponent's smothering tithe. Something like that. You're trying to find an answer to deal with a problem. Now we have archetypes, which is like describing kind of what the deck is, what it's doing. It's a specific branch of influential and like competitive decks in the meta game.
My deck is focused on beating you up. My deck is focused on stopping you from doing anything.
My deck's focused on slowing the game down and making everyone else miserable while I get to win the game.
Yeah, that sounds like fun. We're going to have a whole show dedicated to the kinds of decks that you can play, because there's a lot. Because it is important to understand when you're trying to figure out what deck you want to play or what deck you want to build. Understanding what it does, how it wins, what your goals are, what it can and cannot do is really important to being able to successfully play that deck. Then we have one that's just kind of a lot of things in one. You've got beats, beat down, they're all kind of the same thing. Either I'm beating you down through combat damage, I'm attacking with my creatures every turn, you're just able to put so much pressure on your opponent, they're like getting a beat down.
It's just constant smacking. Yeah. You're just going at it. You don't care what anyone else is doing. You're just punching face.
You've got like your beats are just like repeated attacks from creatures, and they're usually huge. Those are your beaters. Those are the huge Tyrannosaurus 10-10 bastards that are just...
Now we have bin, which is for our one-half Australian viewers. You should know what bin is. Bin is the graveyard, or the trash can, which is basically what the graveyard is. So say you have to discard a card to the graveyard. Instead, someone might say, I'm a bin this card, which is they're putting it in their graveyard, but just saying it in a different kind of way.
Then we have blinking. Blinking is what people are referring to when they're talking about like phasing, or when they're exiling something and then returning it to the battlefield. That's what they're calling it. That's not actually the name of what is happening, but that's what people say.
I think it gets its name from the card Momentary Blink, which does that. It exiles your creature and it comes back. So all of those are now like blink cards, like Ephemerate and Ghostly Flicker and
Blinking, Flickering.
Blink, Flicker, Tomato. A blank, kind of referring to like shooting a blank, drawing a blank. All your cards are kind of like bad in this moment scenario. You're shooting blanks. I needed a removal spell so I could get past this big creature. I drew a welding jar. Beans.
Then we have blowing up, which is to destroy a permanent, a land, an artifact, an enchantment. The card says destroy, but 9 times out of 10 someone's going to say, I'm going to blow up your thing.
A blowout is a very like well-timed spell or ability, something of that sort that blows out your opponent and they can't do anything anymore, and it lets you win the game, basically. Say you attack with all of your creatures and before blocks you overload a Cyclonic Rift, and your opponent can't do anything about it. That's a blowout, because then you just get to win the game.
Well, then you have the board, which is, the permanents that are on the battlefield. Every player has their own board, and you use that information of what they have and use that to kind of like assess the next couple things, like board presence.
Board state.
The board presence is, here is what the opponent has available.
Right, and the board state is like the current situation of the entirety of the game. Next up, to deal with all of those pesky board states and things, we have board wipes, which are cards like Wrath of God, Damnation, Ingaruk's Wake, Farewell, Merciless Eviction, Supreme Verdict.
Then we have the Bolt, which is just kind of like a shortened for lightning bolt or dealing 3 damage to something. A lot of people like to bolt the bird, so they will cast lightning bolt targeting a Birds of Paradise, and it's very sad.
It's also used in reference to, like, you may not actually be bolting a bird, but it's like, oh, I'm gonna bolt your small creature. Someone still might say bolt the bird. Bounce is an effect that returns a permanent or a spell back to its controller's hand. Or it is also referred to as, there's a land cycle in original Ravnica that are called bounce lands. They come into play tapped. They tap for 2, but you have to return a land you control to your hand. Or like Chain of Vapor. You target a permanent on the battlefield, a non-land permanent on the battlefield, and you get to return that card to its owner's hand.
Next up we have brewing, which is just the act of deck building, whether it's something new and original, or you're kind of taking someone else's list and trying to modify it to how you like to play. When you're building your deck, it's brewing.
Now we have broken, usually referring to a just absolutely just busted card, like a Hogak Risen Necropolis. The card is broken, which is why it only lasted 78 days in the modern format of Magic the Gathering.
When you are burning, or your deck is a burn strategy, it's just dealing direct damage. So you're casting lightning bolts, you're casting abrades, you're dealing damage to your opponent in a non-combat form.
You're doing your skewer the critics and lightning helixes and Boros charms and stuff. You're just casting small spells, doing big damage, hoping to kill your opponent before they get to do anything, really.
Right, which is called burning out. If you are killing your opponent using these kinds of spells, you're burning them out.
Then we have Cantrip. Cantrip is a spell that has draw tacked onto it as an additional effect, such as like preordain, ponder. When I think of cantrips, I think of like serum visions and like that kind of stuff where you like, ooh, I get to look at a few cards and then I get to draw a card, or I get to draw a card and look at a few cards.
You're just doing little oogity boogity sorceries on your library. Next up is a format. It's called CEDH, or Competitive Elder Dragon Highlander. It's a lot of words for commander. It's commander. It is a 4-player format. You have a commander. The reason that it's called CEDH, or competitive, is because it is a format that is based around the objective of winning
as fast as possible,
and that you are building your decks to create a path to you winning quicker than your opponents, or being able to have answers to your opponents trying to win as quickly as possible. There's nothing wrong with non-competitive or casual commander. There's nothing wrong with competitive. They just have different
lines of play. CEDH, you're really in tune with what's going on. You're making sure everyone's doing everything correctly. You're playing as optimally as you can, like everything like that. And whereas I view casual commander, it's more of like you're just hanging around with your friends, having a good time, slinging spells kind of thing.
I feel like in casual commander, it's more about like having fun, and like your deck might have a theme.
You're playing beard tribal, so every card in your deck has to have a beard or something like that.
Yeah, that's very silly. Yeah. Or you're playing like dragons or something. Like you're doing something. You want to make tokens, you want to make counters, you want to do things that normally in a competitive commander format, you either don't have the mana or don't have the time, or they're just not like relevant to you
winning the game.
Yeah.
You might hear this around your local game store. Chaff, like when you see a stack of cards at the end of a table, like after someone got done drafting kind of thing, that is referred to as chaff, which is like not necessarily unplayable cards, but like they're the cards that like no one really wants. They're just the bulk free cards that people don't really want.
Then we have Chump Block. A Chump Block is a creature on creature blocking scenario.
Creature on creature.
It's just meant to preserve your life total, but you're not trying to like kill the other person's creature. You're not trying to make an effective block that would save your creature. It's, oh, okay, you have a 4/4 coming at me and I have this 1/1 token. I'm gonna chump block it because
I don't want to take 4.
I don't want to take 4. I know that it's not gonna do really anything to your creature, and I don't care. You can just go to the bin with the rest of them.
Next up we have a clock, which is like referring to how many turns left basically your opponent or you have to answer what is going on. So say I've got a board of like 6 10/10s and my opponent has really nothing. It was like my opponent's on a 1-turn clock to find the answer to all of my creatures.
Then we have CMC, which is short for converted mana cost. It's now referred to as converted mana value.
They mean the exact same thing.
Yeah, people don't stop saying it, really. So it's just, if it's 2 colorless, a red and a green, it's CMC is 4.
Now we have combo. I mean, everyone kind of knows what a combo is. You play your fighting games, like kind of thing. You're comboing your moves and stuff together. It's basically the exact same thing in Magic the Gathering. You're comboing your cards together, reach an end goal, win the game. Like, your combo is like something big and extravagant, you know? And things can also be like 2-card combos. People probably don't think like Thassa's Oracle Demonic Consultations is combo, where I do. It's like it is the combination of those 2 cards that let you win the game. Kiki Jiki and Deceiver Exarch, that's a combo. You're comboing your 2 creatures together to make infinite creatures. Devoted Druid and Vizier Remedies, you combo the 2 cards together, you get to make infinite green mana. Like, just that kind of thing.
Commune with is just a thing that comes with green. You look at the top few cards and you take one.
Commune with nature. Crack, referring to as like, it's kind of in a few different kind of things, you know. You could crack open a booster, which is like just a fun way of saying opening up a booster pack. You're gonna crack a pack. It is also used to like talk about fetch lands, like Bloodstained Mire. I'm gonna crack my Bloodstained Mire. Cracking it is a shortened term to saying pay 1 life, sacrifice Bloodstained Mire, search your library for a mountain or swamp card, put it on the battlefield, like kind of thing. It is also referred to as like sacrificing other things like tokens, like your treasure tokens and stuff like that. And now we have curve. Curve is like kind of what your deck relies on. So say you built a deck and you put 15 lands in it, but all of your creatures are like progenesises, which are like 8 mana creatures. You don't really want that because your curve is not very good then, right? Like your opponent's playing a whole bunch of 1 to 2 mana kind of stuff, and then you're just kind of sitting there doing nothing, you know what I mean? You want to build a nice curve for your deck. You want to have the optimal amount of lands. You want to have the optimal amount of 1 drops, 2 drops, 3 drops, 4 drops, etc. You want to build a nice pattern to where you can play things in the early game, you can play things in the middle game, you can play things in the late game. You want a nice curve to your gameplay.
You want to be able to play lands and cast spells on your first or second turn, but also on your 8th turn. You don't want to be sitting there for 6 turns.
You don't necessarily want all of your spells to be little guys, but you also don't want all of your spells to be big guys, so you need to find a nice in-between of small and big. Basically, going with curve is you may hear someone reference like, oh, they're curving out, which means like every single turn I've hit my land drop, I've played my spell equal to the amount of lands that I've had. I'm curving out, you know, I'm playing on curve. I'm playing everything. My deck is doing the exact thing that it is supposed to. I'm playing my spells on each of my turns. They're having impact. like that kind of thing. I don't ever have a dead turn.
Then we have cut. Cutting is usually referred to needing to remove something from your deck. If you're playing a deck and it's not playing as optimally, or there's some cards that you're either like not playing or aren't seeing a lot of value from, you might say that you need to cut a couple cards. You're building a deck and you're over the number of cards that you can have. You'd need to cut a couple cards. A dead card is very similar to like a blank card. It's not relevant and it's unplayable
in that time of the game.
If I'm trying to figure out an answer for the 75 creatures that you have on board that are going to kill me next turn, and I have so much land but nothing in my hand, and I draw another land, well, that's a pretty dead card because that's not going to help me any. Similarly, there's dead on board, which is just a way of saying the number of creatures that I have, their power and toughness, the creatures that you don't have, or even if you did, like they have trample or they die or whatever, I have enough power to kill you, so you're dead on board. Or I have lethal, sometimes people will say.
Decking refers to getting rid of all of the cards in your opponent's library. You've decked them, and now they lose the game because they attempt to draw from an empty library. Also referred to as milling.
Then you have deck thinning, where you're trying to make your deck smaller to increase the chances of drawing a card that you would need. So why a lot of people play a lot of like fetch lands in smaller formats, because not only does it give them the opportunity to shuffle if they're not drawing cards, but it's taking 2 cards out of your deck.
Maximize hopefully not hitting a land drop.
Right. The less cards you have in your library, the more chances you would have of hitting a card that you would need, or a card that would be relevant in the game's current state.
Digging referred to as looking for specific cards in different matchups and situations, usually used through like draw cards like Faithless Looting, Dig Through Time. You look at the top 7 cards, you get to choose 2 of them and put them in your hand. You're digging for better cards instead of relying what is on the top of your library.
Then we have a discard outlet, which is just a permanent that has the ability to allow you to discard a card at any time, because you can't really just do that unless you have too many cards in your hand or something tells you.
So you got like a Putrid Imp or something, and it's like this, you can discard a card at any time. Disruption usually referred to disrupting your opponent either with a counter, a removal, remove target card from their hand kind of thing. Like you're disrupting your opponent's game plan and they're not getting to do what they want to do.
Then we have a dork. We've talked about these before, usually mana dorks. They are just little teeny tiny dudes that tap for mana. You're not really going to fight with them, but they're relevant because they allow you to
accelerate in mana. It's kind of like playing another land in your turn. Drain is usually referring to as like draining life, which is a magic card, drain life. But like whenever you have something that causes mass loss of life, you might hear someone say, "Oh, I'm gonna drain you for 6," which means you lose 6 life.
Especially when like whoever's doing it gets to also gain that life too. Then we have a draw engine. A draw engine is something, whether some sort of permanent, that allows the controller of it to draw more cards than they normally are able to. Your Heuristic Studies, your Mystic Remoras, Esper Sentinel, Archivist of Ogma, Consecrated Sphinx. Something that is allowing the controller to draw more than just their 1 card per turn.
Next up, we have a drop. Could be referred to like your Secret Lair drops, or is also referred to as like, let's take Birds of Paradise, for example. It is a 1 drop because you pay 1 mana and you drop it on the battlefield. Your Wall of Roots, it's a 2 drop. You pay 2 mana, you drop it on the battlefield, and so on and so forth.
Then we have duels or dual lands.
When I think of dual land, I think of the original dual lands, which is like Volcanic Island, Tropical Island, Underground Sea, like that kind of stuff. EDH kind of talked about this already, but it is just the more casual version version of CEDH. EDH stands for Elder Dragon Highlander, which is kind of primarily what the format way back in the day used to consist of, which was you'd play your Elder Dragons as your commanders.
An enabler is a card that helps a certain mechanic or strategy. So you've got draw enablers or combat enablers, whatever this is going to do to help you.
Right, it's enabling you to go off kind of thing.
Pop off king.
Pop off, girly pop. And next up we have engines. Engines is like your car. Your deck's like a car, but you got your pieces out, and that's your engine. That's your engine to churn through your deck and win the game like a mind over matter. Engines can also be different things, like Skull Clamp, like you get to kill your little tiny creatures and you get to draw cards. Or say that I have Basalt Monolith and a Kinnan. Yeah, that's a combo, but it's also an engine for me to make infinite mana, like kind of thing. It's just ways that are making you win the game are your engines.
Then we have ETB, which is short for Enter the Battlefield. We've talked about this many a times, but you have cast it, it has hit the battlefield, effects occur if there are any.
You may sometimes hear someone refer to as they're going to F6. F6 is referring to the original key binding on Magic the Gathering Online, which means you're going to pass through your opponent's turn and not do anything. You have no responses to anything they're gonna do, so that is referred to as F6.
Then you have face, which seems silly, but usually when you are dealing direct damage to someone in a non-combat or even in a combat way, you're gonna say it's to the face. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit you for 1 in the face.
Fast mana, usually referring to your mana crypts, mana accelerant kind of things, Mox Diamond, Mox Opal. You're breaking polarity against your opponent. You're getting faster mana than they are, so you can play your bigger spells kind of thing. Like Dark Ritual, Seething Song, fast mana, like rituals kind of thing.
Then we have fetch, the lands that come into play and have you tap them and pay a life to go and get a land from your library. Those are usually called fetch lands. And the act of going and getting said thing is to fetch it.
Next up we have Fizzle. Your spell doesn't technically resolve. Like it resolved, but it had no legal target, so it just kind of goes away and doesn't really do anything.
Fixing is usually referred to as fixing your mana.
Mana fixing is like to fix your mana. Say you're playing a 4-color deck, right? And you only have 2 of your colors in your opening hand, but you got some fetch lands or something. With those fetch lands, you're gonna go get your other colors and you're gonna fix your mana.
Floating refers to mana that is in your mana pool that has not been used. This often happens because you are tapping a land or some sort of artifact for mana and you're not going to use all of it right that second. So it floats in your mana pool until you move to the next phase of your turn. Any unused mana that is still in your mana pool when you move to a new phase in your turn goes away unless a card states otherwise.
You'll hear this all the time is FNM, which is referring to Friday Night Magic, which is whatever event your local game store is having on a Friday night. That's usually FNM, Friday Night Magic.
Then you have gas, which is when your hand is really good. Just like every card in your hand is good, or it helps accelerate your gameplay.
You're drawing real good cards. Like you're drawing, you cast your draw spell and you drew the removal for your opponent's creature and you get to win the game. That's gas, baby. This one's real easy, real in the gamer sphere, which is GG or GG's, which is a good game.
When someone goes off, that's usually when they're like doing their combo or
they got their engine online, they're going off, they're popping off king. Go off king.
It may not necessarily be just them executing the combination that allows them to win, but it can be them getting all their pieces in place and no one can really stop them.
Or them just playing, not necessarily them winning the game, but they're playing 15,000 permanents a turn and they're taking 1,500 game actions and they're just going off and they're just having a great time. God hand or God draw, I mean, that's pretty simple. I got my God hand, my optimal hand that I'm just gonna like There's nothing anyone can do about it. I just got this in the bag. I got my god hand.
The 7 cards that you could draw that would allow you to execute your deck strategy in the most optimal and effective way. Then we have group hug. It's referring to decks or strategies where you're not just giving yourself an incentive, but you're giving other people an incentive or some sort of gift.
Or you're letting other people draw cards.
Yeah, things that would like let your opponents draw cards or make treasures, or giving them like discounts on their spells. Any of those things can be considered part of a group hug deck.
Hard casts usually referring to as like paying the retail cost of your Magic the Gathering card. So let's take Fury, for example. It says you can exile a red card from your hand rather than paying Fury's mana cost, and you get to do what Fury does when it enters the battlefield. But if I hard cast my Fury, that means that I paid the full 5 mana to cast my card.
A hate card is a card that wants to hate on some other strategy, area of the game, permanent type. These can be anywhere from saying that you don't have a graveyard, saying you can't use your artifacts, things along those lines that kind of turn off
whatever your opponent's trying to do.
And usually turned off for everyone.
Next we have Hellbent, which is referring to, it is a mechanic that came out in original Innistrad, which refers to you having no cards in your hand, but that is now what everyone calls just having no cards in your hand is Hellbent.
Then we have hit, is what it sounds like. If people normally don't say, I'm going to move to combat and I'm going to attack you with creatures X, Y, and Z, they'll just say, going to combat and I'm going to hit you with Dinosaur Bro for 5.
Holding up, which is referred to as like your opponent's got untapped mana. They're holding up mana to respond to something that you're gonna do. So you may hear someone be like, oh, he's holding up 2 blue mana. He's got a counter spell. And that's it for you to decide whether or not like you think he's bluffing or he actually has the counter spell, but you could clearly see that he's holding up that 2 blue mana.
In the air is when you get bonked by something that flies.
Jank card, jank rare, referring to a card that's like, it's not really crazy competitive, but it's like, it can win in a real goofy way. So it's like, that's whack. That's jank. Possibility Storm. That's a real jank card. Could you win the game with it? Yeah, absolutely, but it's real goofy.
And then like your junk rare is a rare that just doesn't really have any value. Like it's a rare, but it's probably worth like 12 cents.
Man, that sure was a rare, but there's a common in this booster pack that's way better.
Yeah.
To keep is referring to as like, oh, I'm gonna keep my hand. You may hear someone say, oh, I'm gonna snap keep this, which usually means they're keeping their 7. Their hand's really good. It's really referred to as like, oh, I'm gonna keep X amount of cards in my hand from you drawing your cards in the opening of the game.
Then we have Kitchen Table, which is kind of a format that's not really a format of playing Magic. And it really just comes from people sitting down at kitchen tables to play with their friends. And it doesn't matter what cards you have. You're not really playing a format. It's just kind of playing the game with the cards that you own.
Land drop, referring to is like you playing your land for turn. You can have multiple of these in a turn if you have cards that say that you can have multiple of them. Lock or locking, referring to like, oh, I've locked my opponent out of playing the game kind of thing. So like, say my opponent's playing a 5-color deck and they have all non-basic lands in their deck, and I cast a Blood Moon. Blood Moon turns all non-basic lands into basic mountains. So I've locked my opponent out of playing the game.
And then we have loose, or a loose play. It's a play that could have been a mistake, it could have been incorrect, but it ended up not going as terribly. So it was just more loose. Wasn't bad, just a little loose.
Yeah, it wasn't the most optimal play, but you played loose, and you could have got rewarded for it, or it could have come back to bite you in the ass. You're just playing real loose. And now we have mana flood or flooding, referring to you basically only drawing lands, only playing lands. You're not really committing any game actions. You're just play land, pass, you're flooding out.
A mana rock, as we've talked about previously, is an artifact that taps for mana.
And then difference from mana flood, there is mana screw, which is you've got all these spells and stuff that you want to play, but you don't have any lands to play it, or not the right ones.
So then we have the meta game, or the meta, which is pretty much looking at the different formats and seeing what is being played, what is seeing a lot of play, what is winning a lot of tournaments or competitions, and using that as a basis to understand like what the current meta is. What is, if you were to go to a tournament and play this format, what is the likelihood of you seeing XYZ decks? Is your meta mostly, one color, two color, what the deck is trying to accomplish? All of these things kind of add up to the meta of the game. So it helps you figure out what's currently successful, but it also helps if you want to try and figure out a new deck or a new strategy to see what is popular or what is winning, because that's oftentimes what you're going to see a lot of. So that way you can try and build something that can answer for those things or be successful against those kinds of decks.
Next up we have misplay. Misplay is usually referring to you've misplayed your turn, you've misplayed something, you've caused a blunder, you've caused an oopsie poopsie, which means you could have potentially lost yourself the game due to misplaying the game.
Next we have net deck, which is any deck that's copied from the internet or a published tournament listing. Whether it's like when you're looking at the meta and you copy a deck, or you copy a deck from a tournament win, that's net decking, I guess.
Next up we have a nombo. Nombo referring to like you have two or more cards that put you in more of a disadvantage than an advantage kind of state. That's a nombo, which means it's a not combo. Next up we have non-land. Non-land referring to non-land permanents, which are any permanent in Magic the Gathering that's not a land. You'll probably see this a lot with blue spells, but people saying like nope, which is like referring to like countering your opponent's spells kind of thing. You're like, nope, stop it, quit playing those spells. Some people may refer to as getting the nut or the nuts or the nut draw kind of thing, which is like, I've gotten the most absolutely nutty thing that could have possibly happened, and that's the nut gameplay or the nut draw. You may hear things referred to as being on a stick. Wheel of Fortune is a 3-drop. Each player discards their hand and draws a new 7 cards. There's also a card called Magus of the Wheel, which is I think it's a 4-drop. It's like a 4-drop 2/1, and it has pay red, tap it, sacrifice it. Each player discards their hand and draw 7. Well, that is what is referred to as a Wheel of Fortune on a stick, because it is Wheel of Fortune, but it is on a creature. The creature being referred to as a stick. This one kind of goes with combat. When referring to in the air, what we already talked about is when you're attacking with flying creatures. This one's similar. It is on the ground when you're attacking with only creatures that are on the battlefields, like on the ground. They're not flying, not doing anything crazy. Playing to your outs. Or outs is referred to a player being able to crawl out from underneath like a bad board state, like crawl out of a bad situation and be able to prevail. Or like playing to your outs, like you could be dead on board, but it won't be for 3 turns, but you don't really have any cards in your hands, so you're going to play to your outs and you're going to draw and play the best Magic that you can so you can attempt to win the game. Ping is referring to dealing 1 damage to something. That's usually a ping. There's Goblin Arsonist, I believe. Whenever it dies, you get to deal 1 damage to target creature or player. That's pinging something. I'm going to ping it for 1 damage. Just a little pink. A pip is referring to the little mana symbols, how many there are. like Bird's Paradise is 1 pip, Counterspell is 2 blue pips, like that sort of thing.
Pitching is to discard or exile a card from your hand as part of a cost. So like Force of Will, you exile a blue card from your hand, but most people will say that they are going to pitch it.
A playset is referring to you have 4 of the same card, which is how many you can have in one deck in most formats in Magic the Gathering. You can have a 4 of or a playset of that card.
Politics are usually for commander games, and it's a way of having discussions with your opponents to try and get them to take certain game actions, not take certain game actions, or even just have like considerations about certain game actions that they might not be seeing for the long run. If you're trying to cast a creature board wipe, and one of your opponent's creatures is the only thing that can stop the player that has the best board state right now, it may not be the best move to do that. So there may be some politics involved with that discussion of like, maybe you shouldn't do this and here's why kind of thing.
Pop is referring to the act of sacrificing. Again, I'm going to pop this treasure token, I'm gonna pop this clue, pop this blood token. Like, it's just kind of another way of saying sacrifice.
Priority refers to whose turn it is to say yay or nay to someone's game actions. Very kindergarten hours taking turns on this Magic the Gathering playground. It is something that we'll be talking about way more in depth coming soon.
Pro or protection is referring to a protection spell. Someone's attempting to kill my Birds of Paradise with a lightning bolt, but I'm gonna cast the spell that gives it protection from red, which means my Birds of Paradise gets to stand tall and not take 3 damage because it has protection from red.
Next on the list is proxy. So a proxy is a card that represents another card in casual play. The vast majority of tournaments or events that are sanctioned, hosted by, in conjunction with Wizards of the Coast do not allow proxies as part of their tournaments. So you have to have a real version of the cards that you're playing. In casual play, you may have some people who have not real versions of the card or cards, and that allows them to be able to play their deck or play certain cards. Regardless of whatever your opinions on proxies are, your opinion on proxies should never dictate how other people can or cannot play with their proxies, because that's just good manners, and there are some people who can only play with certain cards because of proxies and the cost of some cards.
Pump is referring to pump spells like Giant Growth, Mutagenic Growth, Might of the Old Corrosa. They're spells that make your creatures bigger, which they're pumping up, they're pumping iron, they're getting bigger.
Then we have a punt, which is an extremely bad play. Sometimes a punt is on purpose, sometimes it's not.
Ramp is referring to cards like Rampant Growth, Kodama's Reach, Farseek, those kind of things. They all get their name from kind of the original one, which is Rampant Growth, which is they are spells that are used to ramp you or mana accelerate you into more lands.
Then we have removal, which are spells that destroy or remove your opponent's permanents.
Reset button, also another way to say a wrath or something like that. So you're hitting the reset button on the game, so you're getting rid of everyone's stuff, basically.
When you rip, you've got to draw a card or draw more than one card, and usually you're trying to like get a good one, or you ripped a good card off the top, drew exactly what you needed. Oh man, it was so great to rip that right off the top. It came just in time.
Rituals are kind of talked about them a little bit in the mana accelerants, but they're called rituals, because they're kind of one spell mana accelerants, like Dark Ritual, Pyretic Ritual, Seething Song.
We have reading the card explains the card. which is an adage that you will hear from many a player. It is usually said in reference to someone not understanding what the card does or playing a card not knowing how it works, and so the retort is usually reading the card explains the card. Which I will say is somewhat true and sometimes very untrue, because I can read the card. That doesn't mean I understand what the fuck's going on.
Rule zero is a philosophy that you have before your games of EDH to determine the power level of the game that you're going to have, because you don't want to sit down with your CEDH deck and everyone else is playing like precons kind of thing.
Rule zero conversations can also include adjustments to the rules for, again, casual fun play. So it could be, hey, here's cards that aren't legal, you can play them. You can play 2 lands a turn.
Have wacky rules to the game. Once per turn you can pay 5 life and go get a land from your library.
But a lot of it is based on power level and based on the strength of your deck. And the idea is that you're having a conversation about what you're playing, what your deck does, what the deck's goals are, and how it wins, to be able to give your opponents the information to fairly know what's going on. To run is to include a card in a deck. So a new card might come out and someone might say, oh yeah, the One Ring, I've heard some good things, I think I'm gonna run it in my Kinnan list to see how it goes. So it's just like an inclusion of a card.
Sack is referring to sacrificing a permanent.
And a sack outlet is a permanent that allows you to sacrifice a permanent.
Sandbag or sandbagging is referring to stockpiling your cards in your hand rather than playing them, getting cards to like bluff out your opponent kind of thing.
To scoop is to concede the game, which you, according to the comprehensive rules, can enact at any time. But usually scoop just means you are conceding the game, but they call it scooping because it's easy to just take all your cards and just scoop them all up.
Shockland is a dual land, but they're called shocklands because they deal 2 damage to you, which is in reference to the card Shock, which does 2 damage to any target.
A singleton is a single copy of a card included in a deck or a sideboard, or it's referring to a format that can only have one copy of each card with the same name.
Silver bullet referring to your silver bullet. This is like, this is my silver bullet to win this game.
Then you have snap, which is to do something quickly and with confidence that it's the right decision. Draw your first 7 cards and it's absolutely everything you wanted. That's a snap keep. See someone cast a spell and you snap respond.
Splash is referring to the action of, so say I have a whole bunch of red cards, but I really want to play like 2 or 3 white cards. You're splashing in some lands for those 2 or 3 white cards.
Which you're typically only doing in like a draft or sealed. A staple is a card that goes into every kind of deck, or every deck that can run it, or every deck of that color. Like in Commander, if you play red, you're going to play a Dockside Extortionist. It's considered like a red staple. So we have strictly better or strictly worse. So a card that's strictly better than another is that it's not just better overall. There is no reason, realm, area where that card would be less good.
Serum Visions over Preordain. Preordain is strictly better than Serum Visions because you get to look at your cards and then draw instead of draw and then look at your cards. Swing is just referring to as like, I'm going to swing out, I'm going to tap all of my creatures to attack you.
Synergy is the interactions between the cards in your deck that allow them to have synergy, right? Whether that's you've got cards that allow you to make tokens and that's like your deck's whole jam, or your cards have to do with creatures dying and then you get to draw cards. There's just small interactions between all the cards in your deck that provide synergy.
Tapped out is a description to refer to as like, I've tapped all of my lands, I've tapped all of my mana producing artifacts, tapped all of my mana producing creatures, I have no mana available to do anything, I'm all tapped out.
A tax is an effect that makes something more expensive to cast, as if opposing a tax on them. Or it could be like Smothering Tithe. If you draw a card and you don't pay 2, then that person that controls Smothering Tide gets to make a treasure. So it's like, oh, are you going to pay your taxes, or do I get to make a treasure?
Top deck, we kind of talked about that. There's a whole bunch of different little slangs and stuff for top deck, but it's just referring to as like, I drew the best card in this scenario that I'm currently in. I have top decked a good card.
So Tron is to have the 3 Urza's lands in play, which are Urza's Tower, Urza's Power Plant, and Urza's Mine. But sometimes people will be silly, and if you have 3 of something,
you got all the colors in your deck. You got some creatures that synergize together or something. Someone might go like, he's got Tron online. A tutor, referring to like demonic tutor, mystical tutor, enlightened tutor, worldly tutor, personal tutor. You're tutoring a card either into your hand or on top of your library to help you get further advanced into the game.
We have a utility land. A utility land is a land that has any other value other than making mana. So it could be like Rogue's Passage lets you pay and tap it to have your creatures be unblockable. Emergence Zone allows you to cast spells as though they had flash.
Maze of Ith. Value is like any card that you're gaining extra value off of, which is like Tireless Tracker. I was like, I get rewarded for just playing the game. I play a land and I get a clue and then I get to draw cards. That's value.
Then we have Wheel, which isn't just like the ones on your car or
of fortunes.
Well, it's kind of fortunes. So wheeling is just slang for drawing a new, like discarding your hand and drawing a new 7, or drawing more cards. So like Wheel of Fortune, Windfall. Anytime there's a spell cast, it's not just Wheel of Fortune. It could be Windfall, it could be Wheel of Misfortune. But if you're dumping your hand and drawing a new set, that's usually called wheeling.
Wheeling could also refer to as, like in Booster Draft, you're looking at your cards, you're like, there's 2 really good cards in here. I'm going to take this one and hope that this one wheels, which means you're hoping that it'll make a full rotation and come back to you so you get that card. A whiff is a reference to, like, say I cast Collected Company, which is look at the top 6 cards of your library, reveal 2 creature cards, 3 convert a mana cost or less, and put them on the battlefield. Say I cast that card and looked at the top 6 cards in my library and got nothing. That is what's referred to as a whiff.
Then we have Win Condition or a Win Con. As we've said before, these are the cards, combination of cards that allow you to effectively win the game. It's not just winning as in I have beat you to death or given you 10 poison counters or any of the other ways that you win the game, but it is a strategic and specific method of combining a card or cards to win.
Next up we have WotC, which stands for Wizards of the Coast.
And finally we have Wrath, which is a spell or effect that just Control-Alt-Deletes all the stuff, all the creatures in play. Just...
If you have any slang that we may have missed, let us know down in the comments below.
Because there's not enough words, right?
You can check us out at the social medias at the Grim Tutors, MTG. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, no Facebook. And I think we're on Threads. I think that platform's pretty dead, but we're on there. No MySpace either. Sorry for all you MySpacers.
If you'd like to support the show and help us make incredibly entertaining and wonderful content such as this, you can find us at patreon.com/thegrimtutors.
Thanks for watching.
We'll see you next time.
What time it needs lunch, what's its bathroom schedule look like?
I could go for a snack right now.
I too could go for a snack. I just had a Clausen's pickle though. It was pretty alright. You're being stinky. Stop. Get some help. They're just guys walking. Nomads, if you would. Is that my sweet pea? Hello, sweet pea. Splash.
Splash.
Splash. Splash. Splash is referring splash is referring to splash. Splash is referring to splash. Splash. Splash is splashing.
Yeah, ding dong, buddy.
That's what I was like. Well, ding dong to you, buddy.
Yeah, ding dong, bud. That's a real dong on your jing, buddy. Ancestral visions.
Nope.
Recall.
Nope.
Serum.
Nope.
Timing.
Of Twister.
Oh yeah, Time Twister. What's the one on suspend?
Wheel of Fate.
Oh, I don't know why I thought it was ancestral something.